Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Global History. I'm your host, Mr. Langella. So guys, last time we were here, we talked about the Council of Clermont, right? Remember, that was the last thing we finished off with. And to kind of give you just a brief summary here, the Council of Clermont was started because the Emperor Alexis I of the Byzantine Empire had basically felt as if the Seljuk Turks were going to take over the Byzantine Empire and end up trying to destroy all of the Christian faith a little bit at a time. So what he did was he sent a letter to Pope Urban II to call for help, right? And this was actually kind of a drastic move, because remember guys, this is at this point the Byzantine Empire had created the Eastern Orthodox Christian Church, and there was a separation between them and the Roman Catholic Church. So for Alexis I to send a letter to the Pope to ask for help was a pretty big deal at the time. Now remember, when we look at the worksheet we did yesterday, which was the Clermont, the Council of Clermont worksheet, I had you guys analyze all the different parts of the speech and kind of look at what Pope Urban II was saying, what they were focusing on, and it breaks it down into a more narrow view of everything that he was saying during this speech. Okay, so and then I asked you guys to answer the questions that go along with the PowerPoint too, because they are connected. Okay, so make sure you do that. So now we look at here. So the outcome of the Council of Clermont, guys, was basically to begin the Crusades. Okay, that's really what he was doing at the Council of Clermont. He explained the circumstances in which they were in. He kind of talked about the major issues that had led them to make this decision. And let's take a look at this quote here, the primary source. Now this is Emperor Alexius of the Byzantine Empire, and this is what this is quoted from The Dream and the Tomb by Robert Payne. So let's see what it says. "Come then with all your people and give battle with all your strength, so that all this treasure shall not fall into the hands of the Turks. Therefore act while there is still time, lest the kingdom of the Christians shall vanish from your sight. And what is more important, the holy sepulchre, the tomb where Jesus was buried, shall vanish. And in your coming you will find your reward in heaven. And if you do not come, God will condemn you." So when you look at this, basically he's trying to basically say that if you do come to help, you will be blessed. You will have kind of a special place in heaven, saying that you did God's work in defending basically the origins of the Christian faith. But if you do turn your back on the Christian faith, you will be condemned forever. Okay, so when you look at the goals of the Crusades, they had several different goals. They had economic, social, political, and religious motives behind them. And you guys are going to do a worksheet today that's going to kind of go in depth with the Crusades and goes over each of the different Crusades, and also some in-depth analysis of what the motives and goals were of Pope Urban II and the rest of the European groups of this time period. So remember, one of the major goals was they wanted the Christians to reclaim Jerusalem and to unite Christianity behind this message of fighting the Turks. The kings used the Crusades to send away knights who would actually cause trouble. So remember how we talked about in the last chapter that there are actually knights that kind of went against the chivalry code. So the kings kind of took this as an opportunity to send away the worser knights to not defend the kingdom, to really just go out and fight until death. And then also on the other side of this was that younger maybe knights in training were actually using this as a way to gain experience and to even gain fame by helping fight in this holy war, to help gain that money, or the gain that power that they always desired. And then on top of that, merchants even used Crusades to kind of make a buck off of it, because understand that now you're creating almost like a connection, a trade connection with other parts of the world, and now they're going to try to connect some of the products that they had that they maybe have never been able to trade before. This was a perfect opportunity for them. Okay, so we're going to look at the first and second Crusades. So the first Crusades actually was not really as well put together as what they hoped. Now this was kind of very drastic action they had to take. They had to go to war, and it was a pretty quickly had to do this. Remember, the Pope had basically promised the Crusaders that you will find a special place in heaven if you do die on the battlefield, because you are fighting for Christianity. So the first Crusade was made up really of 3 armies, and they had gathered at Constantinople in 1097. The problem was that they were not prepared, right? They did like I said before, it was kind of like a spark of the moment. They needed to go and defend the Holy Lands, or gain the Holy Lands, in order to protect Christianity, and they kind of just jumped into it. They didn't really plan ahead. They were not prepared. They didn't even know who technically their leader was, and this battle strategy, or even have a battle strategy for that matter. And then on top of that, they were not really familiar with a lot of the geography, the climate, or even the culture of the Holy Land itself that can help them in their fight. And like I said before, they didn't really have a grand strategy to help them kind of get to this point. Okay. Now, they were able to capture Jerusalem in 1099 with 12,000 troops, but it did have a major loss of life. There was a lot of people that did die, but that were able to conquer Jerusalem and gain control of it. They were at this point, they were able to divide along the coast, divide into 4 Crusader states, each led by a European noble, which had consolidated the power in that area. By the Second Crusade, the Muslims had taken back Edessa in 1144, and the Second Crusade actually was a failure for the Christian armies to try to retake it. In 1187, Saladin, which was the Muslim leader at the time, he was also a Kurdish warrior, had taken Jerusalem. So when you're looking at the which crusades were successful, the Christians were successful in the First Crusade, and they were failed in the Second Crusade. All right, so I want you guys to answer this question on the side. What if anything had the Crusaders gained by the end of the Second Crusade? What did they gain when you really look at this? And I want you guys to answer that on your own. So now we're going to look at the Third Crusade. Okay, so here's the issue. So by the Third Crusade, Saladin had taken control, and now they're trying to basically gain back what they've lost. Okay, and there are 3 leaders now that were leading this crusade. However, it was not as thought out or really well planned, or any. There really wasn't a unified force here. Now there are 3 major leaders. There was Philip II, who was also known as Augustus of France, the German Emperor Frederick I, which is also known as Barbarossa, and then the English King Richard the Lionhearted. Right? These 3 were all famous leaders at the time. King Philip II and Richard the Lionhearted were bitter rivals, right? They really hated each other really badly, and they actually argued quite a lot on even just the journey to try to take back the homeland, to the point where Philip II had basically ditched. He just said, "No, you know what? I don't like you, and I can't sit by you and fight alongside you, so I'm out." And he left the crusade when him and Richard the Lionhearted had battled out. Unfortunately for Frederick I of Germany, he had actually drowned on the journey, and he died just to get to that point. So now it was really solely Richard the Lionhearted was the sole leader of this Third Crusade, and by 1192, after all the fighting had done, Richard and Saladin had made peace with one another. Their final peace was that Saladin would keep Jerusalem, but allow Christians to pilgrims and to pilgrim there and to enter the city. Okay, to make a pilgrimage, to be able to now actually have access to the Holy Land, even though it was in Muslim control, led by Saladin. All right, so that was really how the Third Crusade had ended. All right, so what I also provide for you guys is a little bit of a background information about both Richard the Lionhearted and of Saladin. All right, you guys can read that on your own to help you with some context information. So now when we look at it, the first 3 crusades are really the most important ones that you look at, but there were later crusades that did happen. Now, for instance, the Fourth Crusade was a complete and utter failure. When you really look at it, they were attempting to go take back the Holy City again, but they ended up basically running out of materials on the way, and they ended up ransacking Constantinople instead on their way back to basically survive, and they ended up destroying Constantinople quite badly. And so just think of it this way: these are European nation groups that were kind of just ransacked Constantinople instead of actually following in their goals, which was a problem. 2 other crusades that they ended up leading ended up attacking Egypt to try to weaken the Muslims, so it didn't really follow up with what they wanted to either. And then even later on crusades, one of them is known as the Children's Crusade. So basically, just by the name of it, you kind of get a sense of what it's about. The Children's Crusades basically it was basically led by a bunch of thousands of children. that were following the Christian faith to help try to go out and conquer Jerusalem. And this took place 1212. It was kind of crazy to think of, but basically it was thousands of children had band together to try to take back the Holy Land. So basically it was led by Stephen of Cloyles, and 30,000 children, all under the age of 18, had joined him on this. Now, obviously you can tell these are kids, okay? They don't have experience surviving out in the wild. They don't have experience fighting. So just to get to that point, just to get there, thousands of kids died, or they were enslaved, and this was a complete failure of a crusade, all right? But when looking at this question here, what does the Children's Crusade illustrate the power of the church? Like, what was clearly the crusade failed, right? But when you look at what does this event show you in the grand context of how much religion does play a major part in the lives of these people, right? That's the big thing that you should take away from this. Look at how much the church really had an impact on the lives of of everyone, every individual living in Europe at the time. Now, when you look at the Spanish Crusade, right? Most of Spain was controlled by the Moors, which were a group of Muslim people, and the Christians fight Reconquista, and they tried to drive the Muslims away from Spain, and there was a long conflict from 1100 to 1492. They ended up fighting against these Moors groups, and they ended up unifying their country behind Christianity to increase their power. Now, this is the famous Spanish Inquisition, right? Where basically, because of this long, drawn-out conflict between the Christians and the Muslims, that they ended up trying to unite everyone behind Christianity, and they used the Spanish Inquisition to basically suppress any heresy that was different than Christianity, and it was trying to basically kill anyone that was not for the faith, okay? And this was seen as a pretty brutal moment in history, where they basically had killed anyone that they deemed was against the Catholic Church. So this is the famous Spanish Inquisition, but you'll see more events like this happen later down the line as well, okay? So I want you guys to answer this question here. I want you to take a look at the map and answer, first off, what Muslim power ruled lands close to the Christian city of Constantinople? And then number 2, which crusade did not make it to Jerusalem? Where did this crusade end? So now you want to look at the effects of the Crusades, okay? And there's a lot of effects that we can go here. Firstly, you can make the connection that the Crusades had shown that the Christian faith had a lot of influence over all of Europe during this time period, right? And we already mentioned how much Christianity had unified everybody, but just think of what they were calling for. They had unified everyone behind the concept of that the Muslims were going to destroy the Christian faith, and that unless they went out to fight, it would die. And they unified everyone of different cultures, of different lands. Just think of how much France and England hated each other, but the point was they were Christian, and they all fought together alongside one another in order to drive out the Muslims. So just by that fact, the effect of the Crusades shows you the power of the church, how strong they were in connecting everyone. And even to the point where it was very similar to a lot of major wars, where all the men went out to fight, all the knights had left their homes to go fight in this war, and the women had to stay home and manage the estate and keep the business affairs going. So this was kind of a big thing. You saw women take on a bigger role during this time. Now, it doesn't mean that it was now perfect after that, and it wasn't, but it showed that women were now gaining a stronger role in the house when there's times of war. Another major impact is you can take a look at how merchants had expanded trade. Think of how important it is for the Silk Road in how trade had expanded. You created a trade network with interaction, whether it was conquest or just partnership, and all the different products from all across the world are now being traded. The same thing happened with the Crusades. You saw that new products were being shown across from one side of the world to the other, and now interaction was now being made. As in, cultural diffusion was now being evident here, right? And merchants really made a lot of money off of this. You started to see new goods be imported, as in you started to see spices, fruits, cloth, all these new things from across the world. You had the Muslim culture, and then you had Christian culture now intermingling, right? Because there was conflict, yeah, but then there was also trade. There was merchants on both sides that were trading with one another, and this is a pretty big deal this time period. And I think the merchants probably had benefited the most from this, because they had basically made a buck off of this conflict going on. Now, another big effect is that as time progresses and the Crusades had started to fail, you can see that there was a weakening of the church influence, right? And the reason why is because when they first started and they kind of united everyone, that you saw how powerful the church was. But when they start to fail and there was not a victory really that they can kind of stand behind, it made the church look weak. It made them kind of look like, well, we just did all this for nothing. And now everyone kind of look away from the church and went to the kings again, kind of for all their loyalty. Now, the major and last effect that you can kind of point to was the kind of the hatred or the issues between the Muslims and Christians really started to get worse from here. Now, obviously, Richard the Lionhearted had made a deal with Saladin to allow Christians to go to the Holy Land and be able to go to the Holy Land whenever they wanted to. But understand, that was at the end of the Third Crusade. More Crusades had followed that, and more bitterness had emerged from that time, right? And as in, the relationship between Muslims and Christians got worse and worse and worse each time the Crusades occurred. As in, more conflict had caused more bitterness, which now leads to kind of today, where you see this big altercation between major Muslim groups in the Middle East versus major Christian groups. And it's not saying that all Muslims and Christians hate each other. That's not true at all. The point is that bitterness started a long time ago, because remember how we learned when we first learned about Islam, right? We knew that the Muslim faith had actually regarded Christianity and Judaism as being almost like brothers to them. As in, listen, they don't believe in everything the same, but they're people of the book. As in, they believe in the base concept. It's just the small details are different. And they respected them they respected their beliefs. They said, listen, you guys are just different in certain ways, and that's not a big deal. And they allowed them to commingle and live with each other. The difference was they had to pay a tax. But because of the Crusades, it basically threw out the whole peacefulness aspect. It was gone, right? Because now they're fighting a war, killing each other over who should control the Holy Land. All right, and that's really the big last effect you really can think of. Now, there's a bunch of other things you could list, but this is probably the most important one because it's long lasting. All right, it's long lasting. All right, so now what I want you guys to do is we're gonna take a look at these primary sources. This is gonna be something that you're gonna do on your PowerPoint, the worksheet. You're going to read the two primary sources, you're going to answer the question. So the question is, using specific phrases or passages from source A and source C, demonstrate how their attitudes were similar. So you're looking at, now one source is from Pope Urban II, the other one is from Saladin, all right? And you're going to read these excerpts, and you're going to answer the questions here. And now the same thing here, you're going to look at primary source A and primary source B and answer this question: what directive in source A might have been at the root of the action described in source B? So you're going to read both sources, and then you're going to answer this question here. Okay, and now we're getting to the end here. This is going to be covering just about the Council of Clermont. So now you're going to use the worksheet you did and the information we learned about. And first, I want you guys to do this first part here. Describe the purpose for delivering the Council of Clermont. And then I want you guys to, using the document that I gave you guys, to answer this. So what did Pope Urban II's point of view concerning these major things? All right. And you're going to use the documents to help you answer that question. All right. All right. Now let's get to these three multiple choice questions. What was the chief goal of the Crusade? So I'll give you guys a second to think about it. So based on these four, is it A, to spread Christianity throughout Europe, Asia, and Africa? Is it B, to recover Jerusalem and the Holy Lands from the Muslim Turks? C, to improve trade among Europe, Asia, and Africa? Or D, to force the Byzantines to become Catholics? So what do you guys think? Just think it to yourself right now. The answer, guys, is B, right? To recover Jerusalem and the Holy Lands from the Muslim Turks. That's really what the major goal, the chief goal that Pope Urban II had sent the Christian forces to do, right from the beginning. All right, so now let's look at the second one. What trait did not characterize Gothic cathedral architecture? Is it A, sculptures, B, rounded arches, C, stained glass windows, or D, high vaulted ceilings? Let's think about this one. And it says, what trait did not characterize Gothic cathedrals That's rounded arches, right? Rounded arches. Remember, they have the pointed arches for Gothic. The Romanesque was was the rounded arches. All right, so now last one. What was the one negative effect of the Crusades that has continued to the present? Is it A, weakening of feudal nobility, B, trade between Europe and Asia, C, Muslim hostility toward Christians, and D, strengthening of papal authority? Which of these do you think it is? It is C, Muslim hostility toward Christians, right? Remember, guys, we talked about how basically the major effect, first off, they help you with this question, continued to the present should be a line that you should be thinking of, all right? Clearly, there's not really feudal nobility anymore. There's not really a feudal nobility. They may have government bureaucracy, but it's not the same thing. Trade between Europe and Asia. That's not really a negative effect, right? That's a positive thing. And remember, after the Crusades, there was an increase in trade between Europe and Asia. D, strengthening the papal authority. Remember, we just said that the Crusades had actually lowered it. By the end of all the Crusades, it actually had decreased the amount of papal authority because they failed in the Crusades. So the answer is C, because all these things don't really happen currently. I mean, there is papal authority, of course, but it's not to the point level that it was back then. And that's not really a question right now, whether there is a papal authority that we all have to abide by. It's only really based on your religion of how much you listen to the specific church leaders. The real answer is the Muslim hostility towards Christians. That is still an issue today that we see that started at this point. So let's take a look at these last two things. Explain the three main abuses that most distressed church reformers. So this is kind of what we saw in the beginning, right? So let's take a look back there if we're kind of stuck. So this is actually one of the first slides that we looked at. Why the church reformers? Not this one. It was this one. Remember, talks about how basically there was an issue going on with how the churches are being run, and to the point where the heads of the church were kind of concerned with their officials, and they were actually doing things that were against that are going against the Christian faith. So a few things. Firstly, church officials were getting married. They were using their positions similar to feudal society, so they were acting like kings and lords rather than being, a priest or a bishop. And then lastly, they are using simony, which was basically selling religious offices for money, right? So and then obviously you could talk about how the king was using lay investiture to appoint bishops. So he was getting money from people to appoint positions. So that those are all issues that were going on that you can point to. So that's where you should find that answer. It's right here. And then lastly, what were the effects of the Crusades? We kind of mentioned them already, right? That was kind of a few slides ago. You should just look for the top thing that says the effects of the Crusades, and you can kind of list a lot of things. But remember, you guys are going to do a worksheet that goes along with this video that actually breaks down all the different effects that there are listed with the Crusades. So just make sure you do that worksheet along with the video. Okay, so before we finish off, guys, I was just going to tell you we have a quiz on Wednesday. Remember, that's going to be our testing day. It's going to be during a certain time slot. I'll make an announcement that will specifically go over the quiz. It's not going to be a long one either. It's just going to cover the first section. So remember, we only did this first section, church reform and the Crusades. So the quiz is only going to cover from slide 3 all the way to slide 23. Okay, so that's the only thing that the quiz is going to be covering. It's going to be a pretty quick quiz. I might have some written attached to it, but it's mainly going to be multiple choice. So just make sure you look at the information, you read the textbook all the way to section 1, and you do the questions that are inside section 1. So that means all the questions that I have in here, all those smaller questions that are on the top, like these, you should definitely do those. It'll help you guys organize your thoughts and help you do well on the quiz. All right, the quiz is not going to be long at all. I'll make a separate video just to explain how the quiz is going to work. All right, guys, have a good one.